All right, welcome everyone. This is a joint meeting of the Planning, Housing, Economic Development Committee and the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee. Meetings co-chaired by GO Chair Nancy Navarro and myself as Chair of the PHED Committee. And it's Thursday, March 25th. We are taking up today a proposal that has come to us from the business community or many members of the business community in downtown Silver Spring. Those who are seeking to devise a new way to support the success and to keep the success going in downtown Silver Spring with a different model for marketing and helping the outside world and the residents of the county find what is so great about Silver Spring and take advantage of the opportunities that are there, and as well provide the services that the community enjoys and appreciates and loves. So I just want to make a few comments, from an overall perspective, and then we'll get into the packet. And you know what? I apologize for a moment. We're going to do this order, Chair Navarro, or did you want to do the Halpine View? Should we do this order with the bid first?
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, because I think everybody is here for this item already. So
okay, great.
Yeah, and that's how it's appearing on the agenda.
Okay, great. So, and the legislation is co-sponsored. The co-lead sponsors are Councilmember Hucker, Council President Hucker, myself, and I believe Councilmember Friedson is a co-sponsor.
I think also Councilmembers Katz.
Sorry, I'm pulling up the. Thank you. I'm gonna turn it to Councilmember to the Council President in a moment here to make some comments, and the chair, co-chair as well. So I just want to say very broadly that Silver Spring is a huge success, and I love it personally. I spend a great deal of time there, and it's the place where I conduct a lot of my my retail, consumer activity, restaurants, shopping. My kids hang out there. There's community events there. And I am just so, first of all, I'm always appreciative of the opportunity to live near and spend time in Silver Spring. And I don't think anybody, in this conversation wants anything other than what's best for downtown Silver Spring. I want to say that I don't think the county and the private partners have been great at marketing Silver Spring. You may all remember Silver Sprung. That was a slogan campaign for a little while. People kind of liked it, actually. That kind of petered out. We have some events like the parade and the Jazz Fest, but Silver Spring is where it is today thanks to significant government investment, significant private investment, and significant investment of all the small business owners and the larger business owners. But it needs to continue to progress. Like 10 years from now, it should be just as different and exciting, and there should be just as much change as there was looking backwards 10 years. And I think that's possible. One of the key questions is how the downtown is marketed. And I think that's a big intention with this legislation, is how the private sector can do a better job being the marketing voice and creating that visibility for Silver Spring, because it's not something that government does well. Just traditionally, government is not great at branding and marketing, an area. So I know that that's an important part of what a lot of us want to achieve is finding a way to, a better model for that. But at the same time, I know this proposal has created some anxieties. And I want to just say very directly to the red shirts, who I consider to be my friends. I talk to the red shirts when I see them. And as I mentioned previously, and Councilmember Navarro will recall, I worked very closely, and I was one of the council leads with Councilmember Navarro, with Councilmember Irvin, to unionize the red shirts. I remember many years ago, the urban district relied upon a large group of seasonal employees who were not seasonal. They were employed as seasonal employees year round, full time. They did not have benefits. They did not have sick leave, holiday pay. And I remember vividly speaking with them and talking to them about the challenge of working for the community there and not being able to take time off when your kid is sick and can't go to school. And that was happening under our umbrella as a county government, because things had gotten out of control after the Great Recession. They had shifted and they had brought on seasonal employees, and then they kept growing the seasonal employee base without shifting them into full-time jobs. And that was wrong. And I was really happy to see those employees get the dignity that they deserve and the fair treatment that they deserve, and to become county employees through the red shirts. And, you know, I'm counting on continuing to be able to be happy when I see them, because my kids are running around downtown Silver Spring and I want them to keep a good eye out. So, you know, this is personal for me. There have been some false statements made about me in this context. Some have said that I have said negative things about the red shirts. I just want to say nothing is further from the truth. And I have made it very clear to the property owners that I have no interest in privatizing this function. And if there's an idea here that we're going to, you know, get rid of government jobs and replace them with low-paid jobs that aren't government jobs doing the same work, I want no part of that. So that's a prerequisite for me, is the fair treatment of the people who do the work that the community values. And I don't think there's a community in this country that would care more about that than the community that spends time walking the streets of downtown Silver Spring. They want to know that those red shirts are taken care of and that they're treated fairly. Now, none of that is to say that the way things are operating can't be improved. And I think they can. So I'm looking forward to seeing changes and improvements that deliver services more effectively. And I think we're going to have to achieve that, because, you know, we hear a lot of criticism. I hear from a lot of people that there needs to be some improvements. But very broadly, I think this is the beginning of a conversation. You know, the co-sponsor and I, council president, we're not trying to rush anything here. You know, this came to us from those who are seeking to create a bid. They're seeking to facilitate a process. We want it to be a process that is comfortable and is deliberative. And so we've got a lot of work to do. We're nowhere near ready to vote on something. I don't think your average consumer spending time in Silver Spring knows what's going on. I don't think the businesses know what's going on yet. So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. That's okay. That's the way it works. We can spend the time to work through those, or I should say our private partners need to spend the time to work through those and, you know, achieve some consensus. And that's going to take some time, and that's okay, you know, because things that are important take time. So my co-chair will share remarks, and I know Council President Hucker, so I will defer to the co-chair whether she would defer to Mr. Hucker or would like to speak now. It's you're up next, Ms. Navarro.
Thank you. I don't have a lot more to add other than this will be a work session, as you have stated. I think there are some outstanding issues that obviously we can work through and find some common ground and hopefully some consensus. I'm looking forward to that. The only thing I will add is that I agree that, you know, the red shirts have played a very, very important role and will continue to play a very important role. However, as Silver Spring itself has continued to grow, which is a great thing that it has continued to grow to realize its vision, and especially coming out of the pandemic, we're going to have to rethink this notion of economic development, et cetera, it is, I think, an important concept to consider because it aligns with the facts on the ground in terms of the vision that we have for, vibrant economic development growth, and an area that, evolved in such an extraordinary way throughout the years. We've all, those of us that lived here for such a long time remember, obviously, what it was and what it has become and where it can go. So I think that there is an opportunity to enhance what we have while being inclusive and while also maintaining the vibrancy and the ethos of Silver Spring by taking into consideration the needs also of those small businesses that are predominantly owned by people of color, and that obviously are really the centerpiece of what makes Silver Spring such an awesome place. So we need to make sure that we're taking all of that into consideration. And at the end of the day, I think I'm pretty hopeful that we can find some really outstanding consensus here that we all can live with. So with that, Council President Hucker, who represents that district.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. Chair. Thanks for the opportunity to speak at the to try to frame this. I appreciate it. This is a complicated issue. It's a new issue for Montgomery County. It touches on many of the issues we deal with all the time, but it's a new structure, and I really appreciate the care you're taking with this bill. And I totally agree with both of your opening remarks about the need to protect what is wonderful about Silver Spring and to move it forward in ways that don't take anything away. So, I'll just say to add, Silver Spring's obviously hugely important to our county. It's one of the biggest SMSAs in Maryland and the largest in Montgomery County outside of Germantown, and hugely important to me personally. And for me and some of you, it's home. And in short, I look at this bill because I think of Silver Spring as being very good, but needing to be better, and deserves to be better, and has multiple continued problems that I've been hearing about for years and witnessing for years, and I think need to be addressed and deserve to be addressed. Compared to where we were 20 years ago, Silver Spring's become a fantastic place to live and work and play, both for individuals and families. But it has many challenges, not all of which would be addressed by a bid, but I think they're relevant to just note here. One is there's a current severe strain on our local economy, countywide, statewide, nationally. Many iconic businesses, though, in Silver Spring, which not all of which were chains, not all of which had the benefits of national funding and national marketing, are small businesses like Sergio's that have gone out of business, that have been there for decades. Many iconic businesses that are closed for good, and our residents are frankly mourning them right now. I hear about it every day. It also has aging infrastructure, right? It's kind of shocking because we all remember when downtown Silver Spring was redeveloped and launched, but it was 20 years ago. And so the streetscapes are looking old and tired and need attention. Many of these things are small expenditures, but they add up over time, and it's really been neglected for years, and it's been something we've addressed in little fits and starts, sometimes in previous budgets and in programming, like I invade upon the council to fund Silver Spring Restaurant Week and things like that in the past. But it hasn't really resulted in some of the investments that the urban district and others have asked for, some of which Councilmember Reamer was working on when I first got to the council to improve wayfinding and signage and other things there just to make the local economy work and be more friendly to residents. We also have major private property owners like Peterson that are making 20 years in now, multi-year, multi-million-dollar investments in their properties, but the public sector has not made the same improvements in our properties. And I think it's time to have that conversation. And there's more people using this and taxing those facilities. When I went door to door for the first time in downtown Silver Spring for my first race, there were about 20 to 30,000 fewer people living around downtown Silver Spring than there are now. So that's a success story, but it also means more people are using these facilities and will benefit from the sort of attention that we envision in this bill. And nothing stays the same, of course. While Silver Spring has grown and developed, there's increased competition for visitors, for dining and patronage in our small businesses from other regional destinations such as Alexandria, Arlington, downtown DC, and Tyson's Corner, all of which have bids. So the approach we have now that we hold up as sort of the alternative is really only the urban district. And there's great people working very hard at the urban district for a very long time. We cannot, it's not fair to them to expect them to provide safety and security and cleanliness and small business services and marketing like other jurisdictions have all by itself. And I think there are, because of staff changes and other things there, the concerns that I hear about frequently about the decline in the performance of some of the core services there. So I think it's really healthy that we're having this discussion, and with whether or not we had this bill right now, I think it's really appropriate to have this discussion about the sort of economic health of downtown Silver Spring. So I'm glad you're spending time on it. I've been hearing these complaints daily for nearly 10 years. And so whether or not we move forward with this bill or we amend this bill significantly or insignificantly, to me, the status quo is not really an attractive option. And so in an effort to bring additional services and be responsive to the needs of constituents that have reached out, I agree to join Councilmember Reamer. I'm grateful to his leadership on this to introduce the bill. And then, of course, unlike most bills, hundreds of stakeholders signed a petition asking us to establish a bid to help meet these challenges. And it's our job to be responsive to that. So that's why we have the bill in front of us. Why are we talking about a business improvement district in particular as the solution? Everybody is familiar with the idea that we allow residents who want additional services to tax themselves to form a municipal government. We have Rockville, we have Gaithersburg, we have Tacoma Park, we have many other ones where residents there decide to pay an additional tax to get additional services. Bids are essentially the same sort of thing. It's businesses that own stake in that community that agree to tax themselves a little bit more to get additional services they don't think are adequately performed by the government with the existing tax revenues that we have. So while it's a new concept to Montgomery County, it's very much in line with the way municipal governments are structured, and it's not a new concept anywhere else. There are 2,500 bids in North America. They exist in DC, Northern Virginia, and Baltimore, but none in Montgomery County, which is why I think they seem unfamiliar to some of our residents in the debate that Councilmember Reamer mentioned about this bill. In 2017, and this is relatively recent history, it was only 2017, just a few years ago, that the Montgomery County State Delegation introduced and passed legislation at the state level allowing Montgomery County to authorize a bid under the requirements of the state law. And so since then, there have been people working to advance the idea of setting up a bid in Silver Spring, and they certainly, people have, residents have the right to do that anywhere else as well. I want to be clear, as Councilmember Reamer said, we're not anywhere close to the finish line, but under state law, the council has to review the bid application, which is how we get to this point. We're nowhere near the finish line. To me, this is only the beginning of a healthy legislative process, and my colleagues and I are at the beginning of the budget process. So we're not going to have a whole lot of time to deal with this until later in the summer, till the budget's complete. I know we want to hear from all the business owners, residents, other stakeholders that have opinions about this bill, and I really want the proponents to do their work to get out there and explain their concept and listen to all the residents over the intervening period, so we can have a really good product in front of us to consider that reflects the best thinking of all the affected residents. So, as Councilmember Navarro suggested, the goal is not to make Silver Spring just like Bethesda or less diverse or push out small businesses or any of the hyperbole I've heard in reaction to this. We all, I think, share the same goals and have no interest in doing that. But we want Silver Spring to be as strong as it can be economically and in terms of providing a real entertaining and exciting destination for other people and home for the rest of us. So that's what I think we're doing here today. So thank you for your attention to that and for putting up with my extended introductory remarks.
Terrific. Would any other council members like to make some introductory comments? All right. So I'm going to turn it to Bob Drummer. He's going to walk through the packet. We've got joining us on the Zoom, and invite them to turn on their cameras if they're not already. Roberto Rodriguez, Steve Silverman, Theo Holt, Steve Roblin, and Gino Wren. And, at some point, I think we should turn to former council member Steve Silverman just to hear why he has been working with, why they are seeking a bid, and talk a bit about who they have been working with so far and so forth. And again, we're not voting on anything today. We can probably just start plowing in. One additional comment: when the bid map was first submitted, it left out part of Fenton Village, and Councilmember Hucker and I observed that and said, that wasn't going to fly, and we needed to have a boundary that could include all of the area of downtown Silver Spring that should be covered. And I know Steve worked then and worked with business owners in those areas, and subsequently got the signatures requisite to amend the map. Was not able to submit it initially under those as a full map, just because hadn't gotten all the signatures yet, but then subsequently got them. I think that has given rise to a little bit of concern about how the bid would really represent the full business community. And, I just want to say that we're looking for something here that does involve the full community and embraces and is an advocate for and is a success leader for every small business and all the small businesses, and as well as Peterson and Washington Property Companies and the bigger companies. It's everybody hopefully rowing in the same direction and winning together. And if we can't find that approach, then it's not worth doing. Like, Silver Spring is united now in its success, and I think it should be united going forward. So I don't think there's really any disagreement about that, but we probably need to consider some changes to kind of make it clear. Bob, why don't you get us going through the packet?
Thank you.
Let me know, Bob, when you think would be the time to turn it to Steve, if that's now or if you think that is subsequent.
Let me just give a little background first. Just that what we're talking about is a bill that would create a business improvement district, or shortened acronym is BID, for the Silver Spring Central Business District. As Councilmember Reamer mentioned, the original application created a boundary that was a little bit short of the entire existing urban district, but their updated application is identical. So for purposes of this bill, the bill would need, if the council enacts the bill on this application, it would need to be amended to change the boundaries. But as far as we're concerned here, we can assume that the boundaries for the proposed bid would be the same as the urban district. I think that's fair to assume. And so any discussion about we're not covering the entire urban district are really not relevant at the moment anymore. The bid is generally a privately directed and publicly sanctioned organization that supplements public services within geographically designed boundaries by generating multi-year revenue through a compulsory assessment on local property and their businesses. In this case, it's property tax. If you look at the Mr. Roblin's economic impact statement, he went through some academic literature, which generally, or much of the literature, supports bids as a method of improving the economy, the local economy of the district. What makes this one different, though, and this is where I think we need to start, is this is not, unlike all the academic studies, this is not an area that does not, that has nothing. This is an area that has what we call an urban district, the Silver Spring Urban District. And until the council and all the stakeholders figure out how we're going to go forward with the urban district and the bid, or just the urban district, we can't really finalize this bill.
Can I just make an observation there? I'm familiar with bids from the Golden Triangle bid in DC. Some of what I hear about, like Crystal City. When I think about the NOMA bid in DC, when I think about those, I think about bids that have been very successful, but also started in places that were, downtown DC was a ghost town on the weekends and at night when that bid began. Downtown Silver Spring is a vibrant, buzzing place with a lot of people and a lot of small businesses. So it is going to be more complicated to try to figure out how to build an organization in that context. I just think that's an important context here. Is we're not starting from scratch, and I think a lot of times bids started from scratch, more or less. So, please continue.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And right now the bill would create the business improvement district to perform enhanced services for the area that are essentially the same as the enhanced services that the urban district is required to provide. So there needs to be some coordination between the two. The Silver Spring Urban District, it is not a bid. It's, there are 3 urban districts in the county. There's Bethesda, Wheaton, and Silver Spring. Bethesda has an urban district corporation, the Bethesda Urban Partnership, that controls that operates the urban district. In Silver Spring, it's really the Regional Services Center. There is an urban district tax, 24 cents per $100 of assessed value at the moment, that goes to the urban district, but that doesn't actually fund the entire urban district. The urban district also receives about 2/3 of its funding from the parking lot district in Silver Spring, which is authorized under the urban district law. And they do also receive some money from the general fund. Both the transfer from the parking lot district and any money from the general fund are discretionary each year with the council in the budget. So their funding the urban district funding has been fairly consistent over the last few years. But it's essentially a county-run operation to provide enhanced services with, for the most part, the tax money, the urban district tax, and the parking lot district money, which is money, obtained from people parking in the county parking lots in Silver Spring, in downtown Silver Spring. So it's related to downtown Silver Spring. And then a little extra money from the general fund, which is not is a significant portion, but not nearly enough to support it. The concept of a bid generally is that the commercial businesses in the area agree to have an additional property tax or assessment from the government that they get distributed to the Business Improvement District Corporation, and the corporation provides the enhanced services for the benefit of the businesses and residents in the district. Our urban district's a little bit different because the tax money isn't really covering the urban district, as I said. It's also different because the urban district is essentially being operated by the county. The Regional Services Center in Silver Spring operates it. There are 38 county employees who have already been discussed, called the red shirts, I guess most of them, who work for the county in the urban district, really for the urban district, but they're county employees. So that's, I'm going to skip over the part about the application in the packet because essentially, it goes through it. The application, I believe, satisfies the requirements of the state law. The real question is, the really first big question is, how does the bid and the urban district coexist, or do they coexist? And, we can think of three alternatives and maybe others. One is that you could eliminate the urban district and just have the bid. The obvious problem with that, and that's not something I think anybody really wants to do, is the 38 county employees that are currently working for the urban district would no longer be employed by the county. They might be employed by the bid, they might not be. And that seems to be something that's kind of off the table, but that is an option. That would be a more traditional option, just a bid. The second one is to have the funding go to the bid. Essentially, this is what the applicants are asking for, is the same tax rate that currently is the urban tax that would go to the bid corporation, and they would get the same amount of parking lot revenue and potentially general fund supplement, which I believe last year was $500,000, and the proposed budget is significantly less this year in the executive's proposed budget. And then they would contract back with the county to provide some of the services that the 38 county employees currently provide. So those employees would remain county employees, and it would be subject to a contract with the bid, which creates an interesting circular system where the county taxes the business owners, gives the money to the bid district corporation, then gets some of that money back to pay for its county employees that are doing some of the work. That can work, I suppose, but it requires a pretty extensive negotiation of the contract and delineation of the work, and is likely, well, may or may not, end up in some duplication of supervisory management services that increases the cost, not doesn't decrease the cost. The third option is to try and have the duties split up in the legislation. Figure out who's doing what. The urban district does X, the bid does Y, and then divide up the tax money. Now, accordingly, by percentage, I guess, of the work. So that way you'd have an urban district responsible, let's say, for streetscapes and maintenance, things like that, and have the bid responsible for marketing, and that's just throwing out the bare bones, one way to divide the work. But you'd have to figure out how much of the money is appropriate for marketing and how much for the rest of the work. That would have to be, it would take some negotiation and discussion, probably between the executive branch, which is operating the urban district, and the applicants, not necessarily the county council. So those are the three possibilities that I can see for having the urban district to coexist, or having the two organizations either together, or just having one or the other organization. Obviously, the other one is to not enact the law, and to just, the fourth one, which isn't mentioned, is to not enact the law and just continue on with the urban district, which, you know, may or may not be what people want to do.
Okay.
So I think that's a good place to stop, because I really think until, you know, there are other issues, but they pale in comparison to this one. This one needs, I think, a lot of work to figure out how we go about this. And that may be a good place to hear from Mr. Silverman and others who were the stakeholders in this.
Terrific. So we will turn to, in a second here, to Mr. Silverman and to other stakeholders. I think it would probably be most productive, as we want to focus on a specific item in the memo, for that to be item number 4, which gets at the question of the governance of any potential organization and how, you know, the whole community can be part of it. And I just wanted to add, just because you didn't say it, Bob, a natural thing to do would have been to say, well, we could create a new organization that is, you know, the bid that has been proposed, but it has to be a unionized organization. However, we're not allowed to do that. We cannot put such a requirement onto this organization. So that was the first natural idea, that to deal with this question of how do we ensure this continuing, you know, appropriate fair treatment for the employees. So we were not allowed by state law or county law, don't recall which it is, to have such a requirement. And so we considered, Steve Silverman and his team considered other proposals. And what you have before you is the idea that this entity would contract back with the county. And it, you know, as you described, it has some peculiarity in its nature there. But you know, that is a good faith effort, I think, to ensure continuity, you know, and representation for the employees. But let's take a step back here and hear from Steve. And welcome back to the County Council, Steve Silverman. And
Thanks.
Let's hear what you have to say for us today.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Talk about back to the future, you know, knee deep in budgets.
And on Zoom,
look, I
never thought.
I appreciate your leadership and Councilmember Hucker and the other co-sponsors of the bill. Let me try to do it. Hard for me, recovering politician, recovering lawyer, to be brief, but I'll try to do that. So let me just step back and say, so urban districts were created in the 80s, and the 3 of them that were created in Wheaton, Bethesda, and Silver Spring were created to provide an enhanced level of what are generally called clean and safe services. Marketing was not part of the discussion back when it was created. It was, these are urban areas and we need to have more trash pickup, we need to have more landscaping, et cetera, et cetera. It sort of evolved to be expanded to marketing, but it didn't start out that way. And I think, you know, in the weeds of the budget, I'll mention a couple things that are very important. This is both very complicated, but also very simple. No jurisdiction in the country has created a bid where there was already an existing something called an urban district. So we're basically creating a new template here. But the reason it's important is other areas in the county and other communities are interested in creating bids and would be successful. The White Flint Downtown Advisory Committee, in fact, made a recommendation a couple of years ago about that, and other areas are interested in it. So it's complicated. It's complicated because we got an existing structure. But you all hit the nail on the head. This is all being driven by the idea of creating additional resources, but not additional taxes, for promoting and marketing Silver Spring. And respectfully, and as you know, I was not only had the privilege of serving on the council, but also running the Department of Economic Development. The county has historically been agnostic when it comes to marketing areas. Are there pamphlets or brochures? Sure, but by and large, whatever the county's budget for marketing has been, whether it was really small when I was running DED or $1 million out of MCEDC, it doesn't sit there and say, well, we're going to promote Silver Spring because we think that's the most important place to market. And the fact of the matter is, Silver Spring lost discovery. It's had tremendous job losses and business losses in the small business community because of the pandemic. And there needs to be a focus now more than ever on how to offset that. The loss of 1,000 jobs or so with Discovery has huge impact on the small business community, because when we negotiated 20 years ago, Discovery coming to Silver Spring, the deal with John Hendricks was don't put a cafeteria in your building. And we all know what the deal is at NOAA, which has two cafeterias, and the challenges of those folks. So that's really what it's been about. It's also been about, and why is there's about 80% of the assessed value has supported this application for a bid. Why is it that number versus the number of parcels? Because this was no surprise, led by all of the major stakeholders, Folger Pratt, Ellsworth Place, Washington Property Companies, Brookfield, Tower, but also the small businesses like Astrolab, Caldies, Charlie Atwell has been an institution, McGinty's. They're all interested in the same thing, promoting and marketing all of Silver Spring, which is 365 acres. You can put Rockville, Bethesda, Wheaton, Gaithersburg inside there, and you're still going to have room left over. The last piece on the marketing is, so why is BUP so successful? Well, Bethesda Urban Partnership. Their budget, which is only a little bit less than the Silver Spring Urban District's budget, they spend $1 million a year on promoting and marketing Bethesda. The Silver Spring Urban District budget spends $300,000 a year in marketing and promoting Silver Spring. That's what's sort of, driving all of this. So let me touch on a couple of things real quickly that are in the packet. The first is, how did we get to this potentially convoluted process? And Councilmember Reamer, you just sort of alluded to it at the beginning. If we just took the BUP model, BUP doesn't have union jobs. The county writes a check to BUP, which covers not only parking lot district transfers, optional method development monies that are collected, and the property tax. That check is written to BUP, and BUP is responsible to deliver services. And it's pursuant to a contract, which you actually approve, and the executive does, which lays out the specific services that BUP has to provide in exchange for the check from the county. And those services are, in fact, the enhanced services, how often trash is going to get picked up, what kind of landscaping is going to be done, et cetera, et cetera. So we're not talking about creating a new contractual template here. We're basically talking about taking whatever the level of services are that Silver Spring currently has for enhanced services that the urban district provides, and putting that into a contract that would be executed between the bid, if you approve it, and the county. And those employees who would deliver the services are the same employees that are delivering the services now. And it's important in terms of employees. There are 38 employees of the urban district, 31 of which are non-management positions. And the proponents of the bid have basically said, and we've had numerous conversations with my good friend Gino Wren, who I know is on this Zoom, that the expectation is the contract would acknowledge that the same employees would be providing the services. It's just that the county would end up writing a check to the bid, and the bid would turn around and contract with the county. This issue that you raised about employee status, we can't figure out a way to do this any other way, because the problem, and the proponents of the bid, by the way, were willing to recognize and have an agreement that recognized a union. And presumably McGeo would represent them. But our understanding is that if there's any downsizing of the budget, which required termination of an individual's employment due to, downsizing, which you guys have been through for years when there's been budget crunches, those specific employees do not get any county RIF rights, reduction in force. So there's no way to guarantee legislatively that even if they were recognized, since they would be part of a private union, they can't get county RIF rights. So that's how we came up with this. Okay, let's just contract with the county and have the services delivered. So all 31 employees would remain as county employees delivering services. The area that would not be county employees are the management positions. And to this issue of what the costs are, and this is why the middle ground position of write a check back, county employees will be there, is because the management positions for the urban district are $800,000 of about a $3.8 million budget. If you wanted to go with a separate promotions and marketing budget, you'd probably have to create a separate bid that would cost $1 million or more. We believe that by, in effect, downsizing the management positions, we'll be able to provide promotions and marketing people as well as materials to promote and market Silver Spring. And the other aspect is many of the larger property owners who are already doing their own marketing believe that they may be willing, no guarantees, but they may be willing to participate in additional resources for the bid if they know that the promotions and marketing is run by a bid that is nonprofit and represents property owners and small businesses. They're not going to write checks to the county government. We've been down that path for 20 years. Success. So a long way of saying that on this, and I appreciate your indulgence on this, we can create a side agreement that's modeled on the BUP agreement for a specific level of services. There aren't going to be tax increases. That's what everybody basically has said they don't want to see. And there'll still be the union jobs. And we're wide open on the composition of the board. We, in fact, have suggested a specific board allocation that would have 3 small businesses under 25 to be on the board. We've reached out to many of the people that have signed letters, and this is an issue of, can board members be identified as part of the process and put in the legislation the same way the Urban District Advisory Committee is created. The last thing I do want to say is nobody wants to see anybody excluded. It's certainly not Silver Spring's approach. It's not been the county's approach for years. It's just a question of how do we create something that will work and provide the same level of services with the same folks, but still reallocate money so you can promote and market Silver Spring. So I'm happy to answer questions as we go through this. I really do appreciate your indulgence on this. Everybody's worked hard for 5 years on this to even get to this place. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. I know Councilmember Katz would like to share some thoughts or ask a question, and we'll turn to you just in a second. I think that we should hear, just in a very high level from Theo Holt as of to the questions that they've examined and through the racial equity analysis. And again, I think that would be a useful backdrop for the conversation about stakeholder engagement. I think it's quite useful for us to hear from the executive branch. I know Dale Tibbetts is on the call. To your point, Steve Silverman, under your proposed approach, this new entity would need to negotiate something with the county executive. And so
yes,
it's quite germane what the county executive's view is. And I think this goes for Gino Wren as well. From McGeo's perspective, nothing could happen without the ultimate concurrence of the county executive. So I'm happy to turn to you, Gino, at a time. If you want to text me at any point, anyone in this who's here has been invited to speak, just text me and I can always slot you in the queue. So why don't we go to Councilmember Katz, and then we'll hear from Theo Holt, and then we'll go to Gino and then to Dale for comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. You know, I think that we need a path forward, and candidly, I think what we should do as part of that path forward is have a town hall meeting for the people that it directly affects. And that's the property owners, that's the residents, that's the businesses, that's everybody. So they can all be in the same room or in the same Zoom call and hear from each other with the positives and the negatives that people are discussing. I think there is a path forward. I think there's a true positive way to get this done. And I think that we have to be extremely careful that we build on, and it's been said several times today, that we build on what is working and change what is not. As far as the county employees, all of that can be worked out, should be worked out, and that they can remain doing the jobs that they are doing and doing a good job of it. So that we shouldn't have that as an issue. You know, years ago when we were looking, and then I was with Gaithersburg, when we were looking at various downtown areas, what was the best and who should we try to emulate? And not that theirs ever worked as good as theirs, but nationwide, they came back and said, there's a place called Bethesda, Maryland, and that's where you should look. Bethesda, Maryland had a way to make this forward. Silver Spring is not Bethesda, and Bethesda is not Silver Spring. They have different issues, but that Montgomery County can do this right a second time or a third time for Wheaton. But we need to hear directly from the people who are trying to make a living and are making a living and getting this thing done correctly. You know, it was mentioned that about the additional taxes and whatnot. This is not a municipality. It is not. A municipality has other things other than what a bid would be doing. A municipality, in some cases, has its own zoning authority. A bid would not. Not all municipalities have that. This is different, but we need to make certain that this part fits together so that it works for all involved. And I do believe that if we would have a county town hall meeting so that all who are involved know that it's a level playing field, they can say what they want to say and say it to the people ultimately that will be making the decisions, I think it would go a long way to getting this off the dead center. And the fact that this has taken 5 years should not be a sign of applause. Montgomery County has not done a great job of promoting in itself in many areas, and especially if we're going to try to promote one area over another, that doesn't become fair either. So we do need a process and a separate entity to do that, but we need to make certain that everyone involved feels comfortable and understands why we're trying to do what we're trying to do. But we do need to do something. Thanks.
Thank you. Well said, Councilmember Katz. All right, so Theo, we'll hear, again, very high level, if you'll just kind of share some of your comments or, the analysis that you brought to us, and then we'll turn to Gino.
All right, greetings, everyone. In regards to the work that I did during the impact statement, looking at governance, we found that the bid governance primarily favored large property owners in two ways. First, they composed most of the board, which said earlier, which you addressed earlier by saying that there'd be more slots on the board for smaller business owners. And also we looked at how the voting works. As currently constructed, larger property owners will have more voting rights than smaller property owners or smaller business owners. And those were two of the issues we had with the governance and racial equity with the bid.
Yeah, and let's just explore that a little bit, because it's inherent to this. It's part of the way that the state law, I think, is written. So, Steve, can you just share some?
Yeah. The state law, which governs whatever the county does, the state law basically designates as a bid that the only voting members are the issue of what the allocation is different. And what we've suggested, although it can be modified, but every bid in the country has the same voting process, which is property owners get to vote based on either the bid tax they pay or the assessed value. DC does actually have a system that allows tenants, meaning business owners, to be able to vote because DC doesn't have a law. But when you look at and I sent this to council staff, when you look at what DC is set up, if you're a small business in the Golden Triangle bid, you get a vote, but you're going to be outvoted by all of the property owners because that's based on assessed value. So we're not trying to create something that's any different than any bid in the country. And maybe this is an appropriate time to say we could debate for hours about that, but nobody right now, property owners or small business owners, have any control over the $3.8 million urban district budget. It's an advisory committee. It gets to recommend and have an opinion about things, but it's a function of county government. So nobody's trying to disenfranchise anybody. We're kind of hamstrung. And we're also, by the way, hamstrung by the fact that the state law puts a cap of 9 board members. So what we've suggested are the equivalent of ex officios, whether it's somebody from the chamber or Silver Spring Advisory Board or whatever it would be, in addition to the 3 small business folks. So completely open to a discussion about board composition.
Okay. It's a fair point, Phil. First of all, the way that the bids typically work is, well, in the private sector, they're typically privately funded, right? They use they use the public taxing power, I guess, but it makes some sense that if you're part of an organization and you pay, you're the biggest funder, that you get the biggest say. Like, that makes sense actually for bids generally. However, it's a little different here when you're trying to layer something in or establish something where there is an existing process that does not have that. And the way that things work now is you've got this urban district. I would venture to say people are only mildly satisfied with the urban district itself and its work. But if they have a problem, they can call Tom Hucker and they can pound, they can call me, and they do. We hear about it all the time. And I think people might feel unclear as to how that would work, with a private entity. I think that's the real difference. But
if I can just mention one other thing about the board composition. First of all, once the board's in place and it's a 9-member board, every board member gets 1 vote. So we, again, subject to whatever people really want to see happen, we've tried to structure it so there's small business representation, on there. So they get 1 vote. The second thing is you all ultimately have the say over how the bid operates in the sense of your annual appropriation authority. The bid can only be authorized for 3 years without a review under state law. So you can establish it, but at the end of the day, you will have the same oversight over the bid that you currently have over the urban district, which is the power of the purse. And if you're not happy with the decisions that are being made by the bid board, the answer is you reinstate the urban district. We did not suggest the elimination of the
your vision here. You think it's essentially the same, that if the community has an issue, they will call council members, and council members will say, something's got to be fixed. Something needs to change. And you feel it's fairly similar.
Technically speaking, that's what you do every year with the urban districts. Anyway, the BUP is a separate board. Now you appoint them, just like you appoint the Urban District Advisory Committee in Silver Spring, you appoint the BUP board, the county executive and the council. But at the end of the day, if you wanted to turn BUP into an urban district the way Silver Spring and Wheaton are, you could do that by simply saying that during the budget process. We're going to have a transition. We're going back to the way it was. So you will have extraordinary oversight.
So due to the county's continuing control, you feel that the essential function is the same. If the community has an issue, they come to the council, to their elected representatives, and their elected representatives, try to influence the process as it is now. Okay. So let's pause here.
You're going to have 4 at-large council members and a district representative.
I'm not necessarily advocating one thing or another. I'm just trying to give, to articulate how it was conceived, just to be clear about how it was conceived.
Thank you.
Gino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, co-chairs, council members, and other guests. It's interesting that I finally got an opportunity to look at the packet that was prepared for today's conversation. And I want to bring attention to option number 3, because quite frankly, in the years of discussions that I've had with my good friend Steve Silverman and even Charlie from time to time, that's exactly the approach that I was promoting. But quite frankly, at every turn, that approach was, at least said to me, was not realistic. And I, to this date, don't understand why it's not. I think when we start talking about restructuring government services and in any area, we should take the simplest approach as possible, because we should identify on what we're trying to fix and then surgically fix that, not reinvent the entire wheel, not knowing what new challenges that new wheel might present that we may very well have to go back in and fix again. That is, in my opinion, not working as smartly as we possibly can. Now, let me say this. Our union absolutely supports successful business districts and absolutely supports each and every small and large business in this community in terms of doing whatever we can, lending whatever assistance that we can to make them as successful as possible. There's an obvious vested interest in that, but the reality is we want a vibrant business community just like any other part of our community. But I do believe that if we would just step back a second and focus on what the proponents of the bid are advocating for, i.e. a bigger or more control and a bigger marketing budget to make them more competitive, like with the likes of Bethesda, then let's focus on that and fix that. And I think that option number 3, again, that I've been promoting since the beginning of this conversation, is the vehicle that we should explore to do just that. Now, you have equity issues on the board that are very important to the business community in Silver Spring. I've had conversations with some of those business owners, and there's a lot of uncertainty on what their role or what their voice will be if a bid is created. They feel strongly that they've been left out of the conversation. And going back to Council Members Katz's recommendation for a public debate on this issue is important to allow or create a platform for everyone to share their interests and concerns vis-a-vis this proposal. But at the end of the day, I want to thank everybody for maintaining the position that this particular workforce should be held harmless in whatever vehicle we construct. But I think the easiest path, the most surgical path, is to pursue option number 3. So that's what I would propose. In a recent conversation with Steve and our attorneys, we talked about the side deal or the side agreement. I'm not a proponent of having all sorts of different agreements. It becomes cumbersome, and that can lead to future challenges that neither party wants to be presented with. I think that it should be a clean structure where the bid handles the non-custodial work, if you will, the maintenance of the business district and so forth and so on. Separate those two, identify the authority and the responsibilities of the two sides. And I'm confident that we can work in partnership and make Silver Spring or transform Silver Spring to a more vibrant business community. So that's our just 30-foot comments regarding where we are at this moment.
Great, thank you. It's helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to hear from Dale, and then we'll turn it to Councilmember Navarro. And I know many of us are talking in real time here. Councilmember Katz threw out a very interesting idea of a town hall. I think a lot of us are interested in additional process that is transparent to the public so that there can be kind of a stakeholder engagement and we can work issues out. There's letters of concern. I mean, look, no surprise when something involves significant change, there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of concerns. We have letters in here from local small businesses. We have letters in here from the largest businesses in downtown Silver Spring. Everyone has some questions and some concerns. So we've got a lot of work to do going forward. I think the question is, what's the process that we might use? So let's go to Dale, and then we'll go to the co-chair, Nancy Navarro.
Well, thank you, Chair Reamer, council members. I'm also joined in today with Riumberto Rodriguez, as well as Ken Hartman, both who have the real life experience of operating in urban areas, this type of an operation. So I would encourage you to invite them to share their perspectives on this as well. The executive testimony was that with everything, there can always be improvement, and our urban districts functioning certainly could use improvement. So we are committed to looking at that, working with the stakeholders in order to improve the operations of the urban district. Frankly, the marketing is a function of funds. There has been, in order to do all of what we affectionately call the red shirt operations, there is a limited number of funds left over for more of the promotions. I do not believe, but this is what we will work with others to check out. Is there any efficiency that can be found in that operation? But I don't think that we can just, and I know this was, do away with the management of the operation there. We have the proposed budget in the bid application that we can compare to the budget that we have for the operation of Silver Spring to see what aligns and what doesn't. Is there room to do more? And as the executives testified, the business community can form a private marketing association, as others have done, in order to promote the marketing that is that they think will be the most beneficial for Silver Spring as well as their businesses in Silver Spring. The urban district, as currently composed, has a variety of businesses. It has small businesses. We have a very diverse business community and a very diverse public community that uses our urban district. The plaza in 2010 had 7 significant events. We're over 50 events in that plaza in 2017. Of course, this year everything was kaplooey, but but we are very diverse in a lot of different users. So there is a lot of activity. And as Steve mentioned, this started out as a clean and safe operation, because I was here at that same time too. And it has evolved. We have many more people on the street than it was in the beginning. We have staff that is supporting these operations that are happening in the plaza and around Silver Spring. But I would, again, Ken and Riumberto have the real experience about what's happening in Silver Spring, and possibilities of how we could move forward and reach the vision that the folks who are promoting the bid wish, as well as making sure we do preserve the vitality and the diversity that our existing urban district provides.
Thank you. Important to know the executive branch's posture here. I'm just going to compliment Riumberto and then move it over to my co-chair. But downtown Silver Spring is a success story, and the work that Riumberto has done over the years to promote placemaking there, I think has been phenomenal. And I also credit the private sector businesses that have invested greatly in downtown Silver Spring and the work that they do. The private sector is, of course, a driving force in the success of Silver Spring. But the government's role here, I think, has been really special, and I think people really like it. So, I think Silver Spring is enormously popular, and Riumberto, you've been a big part of that. So thank you. I think everyone thanks you for this very unique approach. I don't know how many other local places in this country have the precise blend that we have, which, it is how it is because that's the way it evolved. And there may be ways to improve it as well. Nancy.
Thank you. So I just want to sort of summarize where I am, at least from the perspective of what I've heard so far. I think that there's no doubt that this is unique, as it was just stated, because we already have something in place. And I think the mayor of Silver Spring, Mr. Riumberto Rodriguez, has done an outstanding job at creating a real connection there with the residents and the stakeholders, et cetera. And that is something that is a huge asset. So, as we also heard, I guess we are identifying this area of improvement, which really has to do with the additional branding and the visual marketing and things of that nature. I think that is very important, because we do need to be thinking about post-COVID-19 recovery and what that's going to look like, and kind of shift our thinking. So I feel like, at least for me, it seems like we have a pretty good understanding of the outstanding issues. We like what we have in place. We think that has created a real sense of community there, and that has to be acknowledged. But there, definitely is there is this desire, and I think everybody shares that, to really take it to the next level, if you will, right? So we did have a lot of conversations. Council President did send a memo saying that right now we're trying to focus like razor sharp on COVID-19, response and things of that nature. I think we do need to come back, and in the meantime, there could be further conversations with, the businesses, with, people like Riumberto and, the executive branch, Gino, et cetera, to iron out this notion of, is there like a modified third option of sorts, something like that recognizes what we have in place, but also takes it a step further. to get us to where we believe we want to be. To me, that sounds like a perfectly acceptable way of operating, because we're not going to solve this today. I think the idea of having a town hall would be cool too, because it does provide an additional opportunity for stakeholders to chime in, and that I think would be also super important. So I just want to throw that out as an option for how to proceed with this important endeavor. I will say that I've been really cognizant of this notion of how we enhance different things in different policy areas. There are some conversations going on, for example, about governance regarding early care education, and I continue to believe that we have a pretty solid county government, and that anytime we want to pursue private public, that we also need to take into consideration the fact that the government plays a very important role. It should continue to play a very important role. So I just throw that out because I know that this is going to come up in various ways. So anyway, as the GO chair, I just wanted to put that out there. I know we have another item on our agenda, so I wanted to be mindful of the time. I do believe that there is a way forward here that can incorporate all the different concerns, and as well as capture and capitalize on the opportunity. So that would be my suggestion. And obviously there would have to be a little bit of coordination here, but I think that we have a pretty good path forward. Don't know if
great.
Mr. Chairman, what do you think?
I agree. I think we have to recognize that this proposal came to us from the private sector, and they went door to door, talked to a lot of businesses. This is a private sector led initiative, but it has a strong government role. And so we'll ask Steve, I think, as a follow-up to conduct some additional community engagement that has a public timeline. And I think it would be very helpful if Roberto could play a supporting role there. We'll review the input that we've received so far and try to identify, the creative solution that can have this move forward with the broadest support. And hopefully there's a model, that can generate broad support. So as to your comment about timing, agreed. I think that that's not something that doesn't have to be quick. We could certainly ask for that deliberative process to happen, spring and summer, and then we'll take it up in fall. Steve, is that comment?
Yeah, that's fine. I guess there's sort of one small ask, and I'm happy to talk to Roberto and we can coordinate a Zoom meeting. I think that Councilmember Katz's idea is certainly a good one, and everybody's happy to do that. We've had some challenges, notwithstanding your efforts and the council president's efforts, to sort of really get into the weeds of the urban district budget. We've gotten information, you've gotten information, staff's gotten information, but it would be really helpful if we could work with council staff, and I guess it would be OMB, to really get into the weeds of the budget, because we put together a macro budget that basically took the positions and said, well, that's got to get funded as it currently is. But there's a whole host of other funding that are not personnel. And it's been challenging for us, frankly, to decipher it. So if that's something that you and the council are comfortable with, it would be really helpful if we could all be working on that.
Dale, can you work with us here, and let's get all the information, full transparency. It'll help us all make an educated decision, and I think they need it to try to figure out, what is marketing expense, what does the ongoing public commitment really need to be, and so forth. Tom.
Thanks. I think that would be welcome. I would just add, I'd like to see not just the details on the budget of the urban district, but the org chart and the job descriptions. We've asked for those in the past, and that would be really helpful. And I know some of the leadership positions are currently vacant. So if we can get an understanding of that as well, that would be very helpful in deciding the path forward. Thanks.
Great.
Mr. Chair, can I
Yeah.
add something to that point? Just for the record, the union and the county executives is in the process of putting together a pretty bold structuring of government services. We have just finalized, the blueprint that we had brought the consultant on to help us with. We're about ready to approve the final verbiage of that blueprint, and I must say it's relatively comprehensive and bold. So to the extent that labor costs are an issue, which I suspect they are in terms of more available funding for marketing, we are looking at every department, every division to find services in the labor cost arena. And that could bring relief to the budget at the Silver Spring Urban District, just so everybody understands that and knows that that's going on simultaneously.
Okay, so you sort of want us to know that that in a way there's a process already looking at this, and that may have
there's a process that we're in the midst of starting the actual in the weeds work of putting forth a proposal that will significantly restructure the entire government. Okay, the entire county executive workforce, and it's going to be bold. It's going to be primarily geared towards restructuring the oversight of the work. And if we do it right, and if we do it as boldly as we would like to do, I believe the council will be pleased, as will the taxpayers, because we think we can do two things. We can significantly reduce labor costs across the board and shift some of those savings to enhance services that we all know need to be enhanced in some critical areas. So, and in the Silver Spring Urban District will be included in that restructuring. That's my point.
All right. Well,
as always,
thank you. We have a very concrete and specific element of government that could be restructured and reinvented here, and so we'll look forward to seeing the work that you're doing with the county executive. Terrific. So again, we're looking for a process going forward. I know we don't have the answer here, but the concept of town hall, I think a timeline with different engagements so that it's very clear what's going to happen, and a supporting role from the regional center, with Dale helping us see all the information about the urban district, and we'll use those elements to continue working our way through this and try to identify a path forward, and we'll return to this down the road. Okay. Thank you for the conversation. Much appreciated. Thank you to everyone who was here. And we will turn to the next item. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Tom. All right. Great. Well, this is another joint committee item. It is the disposition of property that was a major feature of the Veers Mill Corridor Master Plan, which was the first master plan that this council adopted, and was an exciting one. And there was a really big question as to whether a fairly bold vision of redevelopment for a particular parcel could be achieved that would be a no net loss of affordable housing and deliver 1,000 or more new housing units, with a lot of them protected by a rental agreement with the county, essentially. So in order to do that, there was a piece of property that needed to be worked into an agreement. So we're here today because the county has requested the disposition of that property. So we're trying to find out how the conversation has gone and what you have for us. So anything you want to add there, Nancy?
Not much, other than I really look forward to this conversation. It's pretty exciting that we did have such intricate and robust deliberation regarding this particular master plan and the exciting opportunities that are contained therein. Obviously, it's great that it's moving forward, and that we're going to be able, hopefully, to see moving the needle a little bit in our stated policy goals regarding housing. So I just glad that we're here and happy to hear what we have as a proposal and moving forward and supporting this disposition.
Great. All right. So Naeem, did you do the packet here? How should we structure the conversation?
Yes, I can walk through the packet, and I will note that Ms. Dunn is available to answer any questions specific to the master plan. So I will refer those questions to her, but I can go quickly through the packet. That's okay? Please. Okay. So the disposition in front of you is related to a property known as the Helpline View Real property. It actually consists of two properties. One is a county-owned parcel, also known as Aspen Hill Extension, approximately 1.99 acres in size, unimproved, acquired by the county in 1964 for the purpose of building a road that was never built. And the other property is a private property currently home to 564 multifamily rental units that are considered market affordable with rent prices that do not exceed 80% of the AMI. The disposition is intended to support a larger redevelopment of the entire property. The county executive and his departments have negotiated a number of covenants, a number of terms governing the redevelopment process in order to maintain conformance with the Veers Mill master plan approved by the council. If we go to page 4, you'll see some of those terms summarized in the packet. The key takeaway here is that depending on how many units are built, 1,800 or fewer, there's one set of conditions. And if the number of units built is over 1,800, there's a second set of conditions. The nuances are numerous, but I have attempted to capture those nuances in this chart on the bottom of page 5 of the packet. And this chart will show you various redevelopment scenarios, all of which are hypothetical at this point, and how the covenants terms work in terms of delivering the affordability in line with the master plan. Another takeaway here is that a number of the units are actually negotiated outside of the master plan, in the sense that the executive has been able to include affordability ranges below AMI 65 and 70%. I will also note on this chart is that there's a little bit of a discrepancy between my calculations and DHCA's. With respect to rows B and C, the discrepancy is about 3 to 5 units, and so it's not material, but I did want to note that for the public record.
All right.
Any questions thus far?
Well, I think we should turn it to Greg Ossent, who is an MVP for the county government. I think every council member, like
the MVP,
right.
MVP,
the MVP. Yeah, he's a guy who every council member wants to get on the phone for one reason or another, most every other day. So.
Well, I certainly appreciate you setting the bar so low this afternoon, Councilman Reamer. We'll try to maintain that status this afternoon. Appreciate it. Thank you. Good afternoon.
But of course, if David Dyes were here, we would say that it's 50-50. But he's not. So
that's right. I have to take him where I can get him. Right.
Thank you. I was going to say, I'm not sure how much you want to receive the phone call, but we certainly want to make the phone call.
Sure.
So.
Thank you. Again, Greg Ossent, good afternoon. Department of General Services, joined by our Director of Housing and Community Affairs, Steve Nagam, and I'll turn it over to DHCA here in a moment. Just some introductory comments to get the ball rolling. This is our effort to seek approval of the executive's declaration of no further need. The property is approximately 2 acres and is surrounded by property owned by Alpine Park. And that is the entity that the executive intends to transfer the property to. As you all know, this is the culmination of many years of discussions and included your deliberations during the Veers Mill Corridor Plan, which you also mentioned. And this is the second of 2 projects to come out of that Veers Mill Corridor Master Plan, where we are leveraging county property to further our affordable housing initiatives. So we're very pleased to have the success in your approval in Bushy Drive and that redevelopment, which is well underway, and Alpine is our next target. This one is a little bit unique because there are no immediate plans to develop this property, and so the instrument that we're using is very important, and that is the covenant that Mr. Mia referenced and is in your packets for review. That declaration of covenants would be executed upon your approval. You would need to do the approval resolution, and that would authorize the executive to enter into that covenant, and that would be recorded on the property when the transaction occurred. And then that covenant, very important, would run with the land. And that's important because, again, no near-term plans for redevelopment. So while the entity, the ownership is Alpine Park LLC right now, its successors would also be obliged to comport with the housing requirements that we'll talk about in more detail. But also because this transaction contemplates a future redevelopment, a lot of the site planning and design elements are not known at this time, and we have no idea what the ownership will actually submit to Park and Planning. And so as it relates to the staff pack, and I think it's question number 3 that's posed for the committees today about trails and open space, we would like to circle back with you on that particular issue after Frank and Asim have had an opportunity to talk about the housing component. First and foremost, we want to make sure that you're comfortable with the housing piece of this. But if we could circle back on the trails and open space, I have some thoughts on how we might resolve that as well. So with that, chairs, if it's okay, if I could turn it over to Mr. Nagam and Mr. Demarais.
Let's do it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you. First of all, thank you, the council members, for taking the lead in terms of no net loss of affordable housing in Veers Mill Corridor, and all the support that you have provided for the master plan, including the Alpine project. The master plan provided us a broad framework, a roadmap to travel on. So what we did was we negotiated with the owner in terms of the number of units. We defined the number of units. Then within that definition of number of units, we negotiated with them certain units, about 18 of those at least at the floor level, which will be at 30, 40, and 50% of AMI. And then there will be some other units which would have been at 80% of AMI, but we were able to negotiate those at 70% of AMI. Then we were also able to negotiate with the owner the maximum number of phases that we were going to get in return our additional units as such. And then we were also able to negotiate if the property was going to be redeveloped to the full potential, then we are going to get additional units, including some additional units at 30, 40, and 50% of AMI. Now, in terms of, there was a lot of back and forth, like you would expect in any real estate transaction. So in the end, we came up to a conclusion and meeting with the minds, and those are spelled out in the covenants which you are seeing in your package. And once the committee approves this resolution, then we have a path forward to get to the closing level. So those are my short remarks. I'll be happy to answer any questions, and Frank is equally involved with me in this transaction. He'll be able to answer any question as well.
Okay. All right, great. Well, I think this is what we had in mind when we adopted the master plan, and really pleased by the progress here. So, Greg, you said we ought to circle back on some of the parks and trails questions.
Yeah, and obviously, questions 1 and 2. It's great to hear that we're on track and reach consensus on those two items. But the third is really a new introduction to the conversation. This was new to us in the staff packet, so I haven't had too much of a time to react. What I would prefer to do is, we obviously are using, it's clear we're using this opportunity in this county property to leverage some housing policies that we agree on, and doing that through the developer. I have no idea, quite frankly, what this development plan will actually look like when they submit it to Park and Planning, and it would be very difficult to capture in a similar type agreement where the open spaces and trails and those types of things. Typically, those are Park and Planning's purview, and I would encourage the committees to consider letting the planning board address those issues at some point in the future, rather than trying to entangle it with the housing objectives that we have today.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, this seems like it's an important issue, but
certainly
it doesn't have to be part of disposition. It could be addressed in the site plan as development does happen.
Absolutely, and in fact, the resolution often may include language that suggests that we continue working together as the developer pursue, all of the master plan. They'll have to comply with all of the master plan requirements when this is Park and Planning, not just the open space requirements and that sort of thing. But there are plenty of other environmental and components to the master plan that they'll have to comport with upon any redevelopment. And so we would just encourage them to continue to work with Park and Planning on that.
Sounds fine. Thank you for that. Thank you, Naeem, for just bringing that to our attention. That's important. So talk to us now about what's next. You said that you don't know that development is imminent. So you think the property owner may or may not proceed immediately. They may sell the property. What do you think?
Right. So I don't want to speak for the property owners, but because there's obviously not a development plan that's been submitted to Park and Planning that we're reacting to, like in so many of our other development plans, we've, for Bushy Drive, for example, we had brought on a development partner. We were ready to turn over the property because we had selected them. They'd gone through a site plan process, got preliminary plan, et cetera. This all precedes that, but the way that this is structured, this gets this 2 acres, which, as you've seen from the aerials and the plats and so forth, is really integral to the site. Their ability to control this 2 acres really helps them move their project forward. And so this is really the first step. We record the covenant, allow them to move forward, and whether it's their development plan or a successor's development plan, it's all one nice, neat package at this point. And so we have what we want. It'll run with the land and then whomever comes forward. But this is certainly a step in the right direction to forward this redevelopment, and we hope that it happens soon, obviously.
Great. I don't know. I'm really excited. I thought this was a bold statement in this master plan. It was a difficult. I mean, it was difficult. It was. I think it was innovative, is what it was. And there was a little friction in doing it, but I thought it was exciting. I think the council was really right on the money in going big here, and to see that that was able to set the context for some negotiation, which is what we intended. And to have, I appreciate the executive branch proceeding. Frankly, I was concerned that the executive branch wouldn't proceed on this, so I want to just thank you and thank the county executive for that, and Director Nagam and Mr. Demaray. We're glad that you've proceeded here, and I think this is something that could be just to make a real positive impact in many different ways. So big win for the Veers Mill sector plan and for the county, and go team.
Thank you.
Any
All right. So do we have to vote?
I suppose we should. Obviously it'll be the full council.
Unless there are other questions.
Yeah, exactly. Questions. All right. I mean, I think we can certainly do it without objection. And it's the 4 of us here today, right?
Yep.
Okay. So show of hands. Favor of the proposed disposition as identified in the packet. Very good. Okay, it's unanimous among those present.
Doesn't Andrew get 2 hands because he's on both committees?
Yeah, I'll take 2 votes. I'll reserve the 2 votes for a more contentious issue.
Oh, wow, very smooth. Yeah.
I only want the second vote when it would control the outcome. Echoing the kudos to everybody involved, this was a really great example of having a serious, ambitious goal and working together collaboratively to make it happen. And kudos to you all, DGS, DHCA, and everybody for making it happen. So thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Great work. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
All right. Didn't think we'd get
Okay.
through that quickly, but we did.